Hi, everyone. Going to wait and allow everyone to get on before we start. See a couple people joining. I'll just get started in a minute. Okay. Good evening and welcome to Claim Your Seat, the realities of running for office for disabled, chronically ill, and neurodivergent candidates. My name is Sarah Blahovic, and I am the co-founder and president of Disability Victory. We are so excited to be partnering with Run for Something for tonight's event, and thank you all for being here. Just a few reminders before we start. If you would like to view live captions on your screen, please click on the More menu in the lower right-hand corner and select Show Subtitle. We will also have an ASL interpreter with us tonight. Shelley is on screen right now. For meeting norms, we ask that folks are to be present and respectful of each other. Please feel free to share resources in the chat and also be discerning when clicking on any links that are shared by anyone who is not staff for Disability Victory or Run for Something, partners, or alum. Please introduce yourself in the chat box. Make sure your settings are set to everyone and share your name, where you are, and what brought you to the call this evening. For the agenda, we'll be starting with alumni and my colleague at Disability Victory sharing their stories and expertise. And then the last half, we'll do a Q&A session. Please put any questions that you have for the panel in the Q&A box. We'll pull questions from there, not from the chat box. So let's get started. Unfortunately, my co-presenter from Run for Something was not able to be on tonight, so I will be presenting on behalf of Run for Something and Disability Victory. So to introduce Run for Something recruits and supports passionate, diverse, young progressives running for local office and supports them with coaching, mentorship, resources, and endorsement. More specifically, Run for Something endorses diverse progressive candidates who are 40 and under, running for the first, second, or third time, and running for local offices like City Council or the State Senate. Run for Something believes that local elected leaders directly influence people's everyday lives and can have a deep impact on the issues and solutions in their lives. What does all of this have to do with the disabled, chronically ill, and neurodivergent community? To put it bluntly, we need more of us elected across this country so that our experiences are reflected in the decisions that are being made that impact us and our communities. Tonight, our panel represents a range of identities and experiences, and it certainly does not represent the entire disabled, chronically ill, and neurodivergent community experience. Our hope is that this is a place for us to come together as a political community invested in young progressive candidates to provide honest advice, answer questions, and create a community of support that we all need to run for office. To date, Run for Something has endorsed over 2,500 candidates and won over 1,000 elections. Since 2020, over 50% of their endorsed candidates identify as women or non-binary. Over 50% identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color, and over 20% identify as LGBTQIA+. Love seeing everyone's names come in here. To encourage more leaders like you to run for office, Run for Something provides coaching for their endorsed candidates, and they provide resources and training, while connecting candidates with partners who can help win their campaigns. They support the candidates with a strong community of staff who will be sharing resources in the chat and Q&A box, and alumni who you'll hear from in a bit. They also work with partners like my organization, Disability Victory, and we're really excited to be co-hosting tonight's event. Disability Victory builds the political power of disabled progressives through training, networking, and leadership development. We envision a country where disabled people have the information, support, and skills they need to successfully lead as candidates, elected officials, and campaign staff. We're a pretty new organization. We actually launched just this year, and this is actually our first event that we're doing. So really excited tonight and for Run for Something to be the first organization we're doing an event with. We will also be working with our alumni to support candidates and make connections that will help them run and govern successfully once elected. So tonight, I'm going to introduce our panel. We have Run for Something alumni who will be joining us and sharing their experiences about what it was like to run as a disabled, chronically ill, and neurodivergent candidate, and also my colleague from Disability Victory, who has around 20 years of experience working in the electoral justice and the campaign sphere. Unfortunately, one of our panelists tonight is unable to attend. I'd still like to share her bio and thank her for initially being willing to share her experiences with us. Julienne Verdi serves on the Voorhees School Board and is a mother of 4 young children. She is the executive director for the Alliance for Headache Disorders Advocacy, where she advocates for people who experience pain and disability from migraine and other headache disorders. Unfortunately, Julienne is sick tonight and is unable to join us, which is the reality of being chronically ill, something I'm very familiar with myself. Although we can try to push ourselves, sometimes it's really challenging to push through, and we have to be kind to ourselves and accept our boundaries. I wouldn't call them limitations, but boundaries. We understand and appreciate Julienne's acknowledgement and respect of her own boundaries and well-being, something that is often we're often pushed on in the political sphere to keep pushing through and not take care of ourselves. There's this pressure to always be on, which can be a barrier for disabled and chronically ill candidates. So we hope that Julienne feels better and that we can maybe talk with her in the future. So for our panelists who are able to attend tonight, Madeline Ryan Smith has been a strong disability advocate since becoming blind, and she works for accessibility rights and policy, especially in healthcare, education, and employment. She is the Georgia Disability Caucus Chair and a 2024 candidate for the Georgia House. Welcome, Madeline. Christal Lloyd is a state representative in New Hampshire, who uses her ADHD as a superpower, giving her the ability to think outside the box when problem solving in the political sphere. In 2020, an accident led to long-term and permanent bodily injuries, and this experience has led Representative Lloyd to be an advocate for better accessibility policies. And thank you for joining us. And then our last panelist is Neal Carter, who is the co-founder and vice president of Disability Victory, which builds, I actually don't need to go through that because you already heard what Disability Victory does. Neal has been spearheading political outreach operations and campaigns since 2002 and specializes in field operations, campaign strategy, and candidate training. He is also the founder of New View Consulting, a political consulting firm. And so with that, I will get to the questions. So welcome to all of our panelists, and let's get started. For Madeline and Christal, the first question. Can you share what your top challenge was, either when you were deciding to run for office or while you were campaigning? How did you address it? And is there anything that you would have done differently? And we'll start with Madeline.
Oh, well, first of all, hey, y'all, thanks for being here. I saw a lot of names of people from Georgia, so shout out to everybody. Saw a couple of Georgians who are thinking about running for office soon-ish. And as y'all's state disability caucus chair, please reach out to me. We will help you run for office. So that's all I wanted to say about that. But also, biggest thing, I think my biggest learning lessons, and I say with some, like, I guess, retrospective bias that I knew this before I started running, but really you don't quite understand it until you're there, is that you cannot run for office alone. I have seen so many people, candidates, young, of all ages, men, women, doesn't matter, doesn't discriminate, but a lot of first-time candidates will walk into lots of different levels of races and not have a team, not have a campaign manager, not have a PR person, not have a treasurer. And while that may sound like, oh yeah, I'll get support down the road, I can do this by myself right now, especially as a disabled person, you learn very quickly that that's not always the case. And I'm a very firm believer that there is no I in team, and campaign teams are called campaign teams for a reason. And I have found a lot of success in having a team around me. And the beautiful thing about that is that as a candidate, you get to pick who's on your team. And I have been privileged and lucky enough to have my entire campaign staff not only be disabled, but also majority LGBTQ, majority people of color, majority women. And I did that on purpose. And so I think it's, something that you learn either the easy way or the hard way, but definitely you cannot do this alone. And I don't think anything in politics is ever done alone. So that's really important. Then I'd say also flip side of that coin, I struggled, I think, initially with fundraising. And what I will change differently the next time I run, which will be next year, is listen to my advisors when they tell me that call time is important. So that's my answer there.
Great, thank you. Representative Lloyd.
Yeah, so for me, I would second that. You really can't do everything alone and all by yourself. However, I also want to add in there that like I know in New Hampshire, our elections are kind of seen as the entry level to politics because there are so many of us state representatives. We have 400 state representatives here in the state. And so it's not as big of an ordeal, maybe as some other states to run for office here. And I would also encourage people to note that it doesn't have to be a paid position to like a paid campaign manager, because I know for our purposes for campaigns, I got by with like a smaller budget, again, because it's an easier race. For me personally, time management was a big thing, especially with my ADHD. New Hampshire, because we have so many state representatives, we are honestly only paid $200 for a 2-year term. We're one of the lowest paid state reps I think we are the lowest paid state reps in the entire country, which again, don't discourage that, but it does mean that you need to work in addition to running for office and also work in addition to being in office. I hold a full-time job as well as being a state representative. And again, with time management, I have to keep that in mind. I set aside hours because I was working so many hours on my day-to-day work. I set aside Saturday and Sunday from 1 o'clock to 4 p.m. Those were my hours to do everything candidate related. Now that's a small amount of time for like if you're running a larger election, but for me personally, I knew that those were my sacred hours to have just for my campaign. I also made use of Run for Something gave me a mentor, and I reached out to a number of people who are local who had been through this before, and having someone to turn to and say, hey, how do I do this? How do I set up an Act Blue account? How do I file for an EIN? What do I need to do here? What do I need to do there? Having that type of person to turn to is really key. And so it may not necessarily need to be like a set campaign manager that you're paying out of pocket for, but even just someone who can kind of help guide you through the process was extremely helpful. And also just being aware of your own capabilities and your own time, and being sympathetic to yourself and giving yourself the space to turn down events or to say no and opt out of things. But again, I also want to encourage people because it is quite possibly the most amazing experience in the world. And on top of that, I guess, what was the other question? Is there anything I would have done differently? I think I probably would have gone out more on one-on-one door knocking with volunteers. I did a lot of that because, again, in New Hampshire, we're campaigning in our ward and our ward only. But I think being able to go out more with volunteers one-on-one would be really interesting and really helpful and give another perspective, because I went out a lot with family and close friends, but with other volunteers, I think it might help answer some other questions.
Great. I think there was definitely a common theme there of, teamwork around the campaign being really important. And I think that's something when we talk about progressives, it's not, there's no I in team, and we're also doing this to affect change in our communities. So making sure that we're working with a large group of people and supporters, whether that's, supporters, whether that's mentors that you can learn from, can be really key. And finding success can be winning a campaign. It can be, moving policy in your community, advocating. It can be, even if whenever you don't win a campaign, it can be gaining ground or just making those community connections that will allow you to connect with the advocates and the constituents in your community, and hopefully work with them to affect change from the outside. So turning to Neal, for you, what is the most important consideration that disabled, chronically ill, or neurodivergent candidates must think about when planning their campaign?
Thank you, Sarah. And a lot of folks have kind of touched it not only in their questions, but also in their introductions. It is using and adapting your story of self and keeping true to your story. Don't let anyone change your narrative. Don't let anyone change your story, because that is your story and no one else's. That is your lived experience. So just stay true to yourself. Stay true to your story of self, because it's only your experience.
Great. I think that's definitely something where we can feel pressure. We've heard from a lot of candidates at Disability Victory, people who are talking about, how much should I talk about my experience as a disabled person? Should I disclose or not disclose? And those are all very personal questions, of course. But one thing that you want to make sure of is that you're authentic to your story, and keeping that in mind, whether you are sharing a lot about your disability, whether you aren't, making sure that you are authentically talking about your experiences and, what you're trying to accomplish as a candidate. So turning back to Madeline and Christal, what was the top issue that prompted you to run, and how have you used your platform as a candidate or as an elected official to move those issues forward? We'll start with Representative Lloyd this time.
Sure. So for me, my top issue, and the thing that got myself and a number of people last year to run for office, was Roe falling. It honestly, when it became threatened, it was kind of a last stance. And I knew that it would come down to who was in our state house. And that prompted me to really get it in gear. I think myself personally, and also just probably being a woman, being a person who has ADHD and has always had ADHD, I tend to think, oh, someone else can handle it. Someone else is going to step up and do this. Someone else is more capable than I am of handling this situation or this problem. But when it comes down to it, sometimes that needs to be you. And being able to step up and take on that responsibility, and basically being the last firewall in the rights of women across our state, was what prompted me into action. So for me personally, I have been doing whatever I can to change the discussion around abortions, making sure that people understand that it's a natural form of healthcare, and not just a procedure that happens in a special circumstance. And trying to change our verbiage about things, making sure that things are accurately said in a medical context, beyond just talking about feelings and emotions and those types of things. But yeah, that is unrelated to disability, but that was really what kicked me into gear, because honestly, it really does come down to who's going to be there at the end of the day, and who's willing to step forward. And if I didn't, then someone on the other side would have.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's really important when we keep in mind and we talk about running for office as any identity, we're not just caring about the issues that seem like they're most directly related to that experience, but the issues that impact our community and that are impacting people, whether it's people with disabilities, people without disabilities. So thank you. Madeline?
Yeah, I would say very similar, but when Georgia passed our heartbeat bill, I was actually halfway through my first election year. So I was already running for office when that came through our state. What really motivated me to put my name in the hat is like triple-sided, quadruple-sided, and it's more of a personal, like, I had that tight feeling in my chest, and January 6th was really what did it for me. Just that entire ordeal I watched unfold on television live, and I could not believe what I was seeing. And I am someone who also, just a little bit of my background of life. Before I went blind, I have retinitis pigmentosa, RP for short, and it's a degenerative disease. So when I was going through grade school, my parents made it a point for me to be able to go and see as many things as I could before I lost enough vision. That allowed me to be an exchange student in Germany in 2014. I saw firsthand the aftermath of World War II. My grandfather, who is still living, is a World War II Navy corpsman, veteran, and was there, boots on the ground, and saw it all firsthand. And knowing the kinds of rhetoric, symbolism, jargon, conspiracy theories they support of what I would call fascists in America, if our country turned into something that looked anything like Nazi Germany, the disabled population would be among the people that we would not want here anymore. Fascists and Nazis especially were known for eugenics, and that scares the crap out of me. And so as someone who is, I was privileged enough to be educated, I was privileged enough to have parents who encouraged me to read everything. And I think that is our obligation as people today in America that have the capability and the common sense and the drive and the motivation to run and to do good things for the people in our country. That's what's important right now. And we are very much at a precipice of choosing to go over the hill or roll back down the hill. We can digress or progress. And that's a choice. And that's a choice that we all have to collectively make. And, I think that there's something to say about, scare tactics. We don't want to scare people into thinking this is the end of times, but our country is sick right now. And we need to acknowledge that we're sick, and we need to start proactively treating our illnesses. And if that means putting people like us, normal everyday people that everyday people can relate to, people who have real lives, who are parents and students and daughters and mothers and other, everyday walks of life, that only adds to the greater good of the melting pot of America that we live in. That's only a positive thing. And so that's what really motivated me to run, is that I looked at who my opponent was. I looked at my state house and what that looked like. I looked at all the other aspects of my local government, and I said, if not me, who? If not now, when? And I was tired of watching my community get left behind. I'm in rural Southeast Georgia, and we don't have a voice in our capital right now. And I'm determined to change that. So.
Thank you both. Yeah, so I think we're really hearing what the impact that running for local or state office can really, have on your community. So turning to Neal, For those who are on the fence about running for office, who maybe aren't set on a specific office or role that they want to run for, what are some things that they should think about when they're considering running, especially when they're thinking about, which level of office to run for?
Well, I mean, I think first, obviously, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the great Run for Something resource, Run for What, where you can find out where there are open seats or where there are potential places where you can run at all levels of government. So definitely check out and it was just mentioned in the chat. So thank you. Runforwhat.net is a great place to start. And then I would, I would say attend Run for Something trainings. I would say attend disability, join the Disability Victory cohort. We're going to have our first in this coming fall. So, there will be opportunities to train with a like-minded network of disabled elected officials, but then also train with folks who have been in the electoral industry for any number of years and are proficient in a particular piece of campaigning. And you'll have the opportunity to interact with them on a consistent basis. And yeah, I would say, there isn't any one thing to do. There are many things you can do all at once. But I would say first, more than anything else, do your research. Do your research not just on runforwhat.net, but also do your research on the different levels of positions that you are actively seeking. Don't go in assuming that you can be a county commissioner, a sheriff, a congressman, a US senator just out of the gate. Understand that there's also policy involved with that. Whether it's at the state, local, or federal level. So I would say research.
Yeah, and Run for Something is a good place to start with that, with their candidate calls, with their resources. And we also wrote a piece on this at Disability Victory last week about why you should consider running for local office. So I will share that. I don't know if I have the ability to send to everyone, so I'll send it to Run for Something and they can send it out to everyone. But we were talking about, why you should think about running for local office and the impact that it can have on your community. Because a lot of people, sometimes they think about run for office and they think, oh, I should run for Congress, which is really important and really great. But the role that local and state government can have on your community really, I think, is underestimated by a lot of people. So definitely something to consider and something that both Disability Victory and Run for Something hope to help candidates on. As Neal mentioned, we're going to be launching some programming at Disability Victory this fall. I'll make sure that we share in the chat in a bit how you can join our mailing list so that you can get information on that. Thank you to our panelists for getting started by sharing your stories and experiences. Before we open the floor up to questions, we have some really great questions coming in. Make sure that you're dropping them into the Q&A box. We're going to launch a poll. So Ben, can you there you go. If you're interested in talking more about your plans to run for office and brainstorming next steps, or if you're on the fence and considering whether you want to run for office, opt into a call with Run for Something volunteer. If you opt in to speak with a volunteer, you'll receive an email from them in the next few weeks to find a time that works for both of you to talk for about 30 minutes about your campaign plans. If you're running for office this year and apply for an endorsement, the volunteer will call and serve as an endorsement interview. If you're still thinking about running, the volunteer will ask questions that will help you figure out what to do next. And while we're waiting for everyone to answer the poll, you can again put your questions for panelists in the Q&A box. Next, if you want to learn more about Run for Something, their endorsement process, and top tips to get your campaign started, join them for a candidate intro call. They'll be dropping the sign-up link in the chat, and you'll also get it in the follow-up email to this event. Great. So with that, I'm going to turn to questions. Wow, we have quite a few. So let's see here. I did want to address something that Neal already answered, but someone was asking about running for office while on Social Security, SSI or SSDI. We can share this into the chat as well, but we have a resource that we created on it that answers that question and what you need to think about. I sent that, and hopefully they will send that out through the chat. But what you need to consider when running for office if you're on Social Security, and how the Social Security Administration can look at that. So encourage anyone who's in that situation to read that. And if you want to run for office, find a certified benefits planner. We have a link in that resource where you can find a local organization that can help to connect you with one. So yeah, with that, we will get to some of these questions. Let's see. Someone said,
oh, sorry, Sarah. I just wanted to, there were a few questions about like ableism and just general disclosing. I think like that is so important. I want to talk about that so bad.
Yeah. So I see one here, and this is for all panelists here. How do you overcome stigma and ableism, and having ableism and disability stigma weaponized against you as a candidate? So Madeline, do you want to start?
Yes. So I get asked this all the time, at least down in my state, where we have some, we have all kinds of disabled political activists and people who have leadership positions in their county parties and at this, et cetera. I am a very firm believer that if you are going to be disabled in running for office, you own that. You own that, because that is something that we don't have representation in government right now. We just don't. We are non-existent for the majority of spaces when we talk about government as a disabled community. And I personally have seen that when people find out that I'm visually impaired or blind, I can't hide that easily because I have a guide dog that I take everywhere. So people are, naturally attracted to me for the dog, and I have to explain the whole thing, and it usually takes time. But other than that, that is not only a situation where I can normalize visual impairments, interacting with the blind community, having a blind representative, that also proves to able-bodied people, I would say also the rest of the community, and to my own self, that, hey, I might be blind, but that doesn't mean I'm not qualified to be a representative. That doesn't mean that I can't run for office. It might make it a little bit more challenging because society is not accessible, but that doesn't have anything to do with my capability of representing my community, right? And we have the ADA, so worst case scenario, I might just need some large print and audio, everything when I'm, in the Capitol, but that's something that's legally protected, a legally protected right of mine. So I don't have to worry about, oh, am I going to be able to keep up with everybody else? We have accommodations. So it's a win-win for everybody. But I just truly think that if you are going to step into that ring, and mind you, it takes a massive amount of courage to run for office. And that is not something that people just say. It's very true. You have to kind of expose yourself to the public, and your life is not necessarily your own anymore. But if you're going to do that, go big or go home. That's how I try to look at everything. And it is very cool to be the first disabled whatever of your state or your county or your city or etc. Like, for example, right now, I am the only Gen Z disabled candidate running in the entire state. That's something that I can own. That's cool. So, as far as worrying about disclosing disability and how people are going to think of you and what people are going to say about whether or not you're capable, my biggest thing is that if they don't know me, if I've never had a personal conversation with that person, then how would they know? They don't know me. They don't know what I'm capable of. So, have that confidence for yourself, and don't worry about what other people are going to think of you.
Great. Christal?
Yeah, I think it's extremely similar in my case too, because again, I've been completely open and honest with people. All of my friends have known for ages that I have ADHD. I've posted about it, I've talked about it. I tend to be the go-to person for newly diagnosed friends, just because I've gone through it myself. But honestly, I think I find it a little more difficult on my side of things, and I totally understand owning it and everything, to disclose it, because ADHD is a learning disability, and because you're dealing with so much paperwork, you're dealing with so much interaction with constituents, you're dealing with a different aspect of disabled life in that regard. It's a little more difficult for me to disclose it publicly in general, but that's not to say that I don't. Like the other day I went to a graduation ceremony for a adult learning center, and it was amazing, and it was probably one of the best experiences I've had as a state rep. There was a woman there who had gotten through the program and was graduating, and was discussing about how it took her so long, and it was because she had ADHD and it was so hard in school. And I was able to talk to her after the fact and come up to her and say, hey, I know the feeling. I've been there. It was really difficult for me in college. It was really difficult for me all through school age years as well. And hopefully one of these days, you've just made this accomplishment happen. One of these days, hopefully you'll be serving up there in Concord with me. So those types of things are somewhere where we can own it and really relish in that fact that yes, it is still possible that you can still do it. But yeah, I totally agree. It's one of those things you've just got to kind of put yourself out there and just be ready for it. Yeah.
Yep. Neal, anything to add? Or I see that you also wanted to answer a question that is in the Q&A too.
Yeah, I didn't have anything additional to add.
Okay.
I think they both answered it quite well.
Yeah. There's a question here about the application process to become part of the Disability Victory Fall cohort. Right now, we're still working on that, so we'll make sure to drop the email or the mailing list in the chat. I don't know, Neal, if you want to add anything on that.
What I was going to say is send us an email at hello@disabilityvictory.org, and when you do that, we will get in touch with you. I answered another question about mentoring along the same lines. So, please send us an email at hello@disabilityvictory.org, and we'll coordinate with you from there about the fall cohort and also about the mentoring program.
Yep. Okay. Since we're on here, I've got a question for you, Neal. You mentioned policy. Is there a difference between policy and politics?
Great question. Schuyler, I think, asked a question. I don't want to mispronounce your name. So yes and no. When I was speaking about policy, in regards to understanding that for most positions there will be policy involved in the work that you do as an elected official, what I'm speaking about is the policy in terms of the work that you're actually going to be doing, the legislative work that you're actually going to do. And if you think that you're not going to do legislative work if you're only in the legislative branch, that's incorrect. There is policy in all branches of government, not just the legislative branch. And there's also politics in all branches of government as well. So I think it's important to just, so yes, to answer the question, it's similar but different. So yes, there is politics involved, and also yes, there is policy involved as well.
Great. So another question for Representative Lloyd, but I think Madeline also is interested in talking about this. Someone said, one of my biggest concerns about running for office isn't if I get into office, but rather during the run. I know that the schedule can be grueling, both physically and emotionally taxing. What do you do when you just don't have the spoons or energy? What if you borrowed so much energy from your backup drawer that you're stuck in bed with a bad flare for a few days?
Yeah, so I hear this one a lot because in addition to my ADHD, I also I've been dealing with a long-term injury since 2020. I hurt myself skiing, which doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but I really go big or go home, right? So I tore all 4 ligaments in my knee, and I also injured my back, which they did not realize at the time. And so I ended up having like a minor spinal cord issue. I still have numbness going down my left leg. I've lost feeling in my 2 left toes. I, have been going through physical therapy for about 3 years now. In addition to, I've had 6 surgeries throughout the course of the global pandemic, as well as this past year, I just had 1 surgery on my knee as well. And so not only do I get it from being mentally exhausted, having to keep up and try to stay with the neurotypical world, but also going through all of these injuries, I can get easily physically exhausted as well. And taking the time and taking the space, and I guess it would have to go back to knowing your own body and knowing kind of when you need to step back, and knowing your own limits, because it's different for everybody and it's different at different times for everybody. You can have a good day, you can have a really bad day, and I've certainly had both. I usually will spend time with my dog, or I will spend time in the mountains. I live in New Hampshire, and I am 1 hour away from our gorgeous mountains. And so if I need to and I can't physically walk around in the mountains, I drive through the Kank, and I actually sit there and I look at the scenery, and I just think about where I'm at and the state that I'm in. And it means so much more being a representative of the state when I'm sitting there looking out those vistas. So I mean, those are the things I think about, and I think about the people that I'm doing it for. We actually had a bill that came up, and it was one that I was able to really kind of like get behind and be like, guys, we got to get this passed. And I didn't get keyed into it until a little bit late, unfortunately, but it was on a playground bill to make all playgrounds in New Hampshire accessible, all future built playgrounds. And one of the things was like making sure that everybody can go into a playground, any future built ones. It wasn't retro building out any playgrounds. It was just ensuring that future playgrounds were accessible. The amount of argument that we got hit with on the opposite side opposing this was shocking to me. And, I was able to remind people like, hey, you're only 1 accident away from having an issue, a lifelong issue. Or as you age, you need to be able to be aware and around your grandkids, and be able to take them to the playground. I mean, it's not just a black and white issue, and it's not just a moment in time issue, but being able to step back and look at all of the things involved, and wherever I can help, that's what keeps me going. So sorry, that's a long answer.
Great. One thing I wanted to one of the questions I wanted to address, because there was also discussion about it in the chat. This is a challenging one, but how can I address the stigma of mental illness if I chose to disclose that information, especially regarding how mental illness could affect your behavior or judgment? That's, the question of how to address stigma is really challenging because we can't control other people's judgment. There's obviously been a lot of discussion about this with regard to Senator Fetterman and his decision to get mental health treatment. And I think that one of the things that we have to do is do a better job across parties, and that includes on the left, about not stigmatizing mental illness. And that means not stigmatizing, politicians that we disagree with as well. focus on the policy, not the personal attacks. And make sure that we're focusing on that. And this is something that's come up with a lot of things when we talk about politicians. We can sometimes devolve into character attacks instead of focusing on the policy and our big concerns there. So I was wondering, if any of the other panelists have anything to add to that.
Sorry, I'm going to jump in on this one right away. I once had someone ask me, how do you do it all? How do you fit, ADHD? How do you fit, like, I'm on other boards as well. And how do you fit your work life? And how do you fit, being a state rep? And I said, well, medication helps. And I think we need to normalize discussing that in general, and getting the treatment that is best for you. I'm not saying medication's best for everybody, but I'm saying, like, we need to understand that there are different treatment methods for every obstacle that you'll come across. And we need to be able and willing and open to hearing that. I mean, you wouldn't tell a diabetic that they couldn't have their insulin, or how dare they get treatment for being a diabetic. You can't tell people that, they can't, once they're into a position where they're able to manage their life and they feel that they can run for office, then nothing should stop them from doing that. And we need to normalize discussion about these types of topics. And I do think that one of the things I love about seeing my boyfriend's daughter is 16, and her generation is, like, really pushing forward and becoming more aware about these topics, and is becoming more verbal about these topics, and making them more normalized to discuss. So I'm super excited to hear about that.
Neal, Madeline, anything to add?
Yeah, I would say that, just echoing everything that was said, but I also think that there is something to say about really analyzing your own self and life before you jump 2 feet first into the deep end of running for office. And I say that as someone who, had to check themselves, is this something that not only am I capable of doing, but also something that I think I'm going to be able to emotionally do, mentally do. I was a full-time graduate student when I first decided to run for office for the first time. I also have a partner. I have 2 dogs. I own a business. I have a lot of things going on. And I had to really make sure that I was prioritizing not only my time, but also myself. I had to make time to make sure that I was not negating my relationships or friendships in my life because I was running for office. I needed to make sure that my GPA wasn't slipping because I was spending my last semester of graduate school running for office, and I had to assess that stuff. And I think that's important for everybody to do. On top of that, I would say that if you are a current elected official and you do not regularly see a therapist, you should. I think everybody should see a therapist. I cannot imagine being a representative or a politician in any shape or form and not having a therapist that's, like, on speed dial. I think all politicians should have therapists. I think we would all be better off if we went to therapy consistently. So there is nothing wrong with that, especially if you are someone who may or may not have a mental illness, or even you just see a therapist regularly and you're nervous about that coming out or whatever, people knowing about that. That's an opportunity to destigmatize just mental health treatment in general. And it would really surprise you how many people will find you more relatable because you talk about things like that. I talk about disability all the time, and it is something that I do in my everyday work, especially as the Georgia caucus chair, but I am never someone that sugarcoats our realities. I will tell it to you straight up. We talk about subminimum wage a lot. We talk about the issues with healthcare. We talk about all the negative things that we're trying to fix for the disabled community. And I think that's important. I have everybody from every walk of life, Republican, Democrat, conservative, whatever, they come up to me and say, thank you so much for bringing this up. Thank you so much for bringing up disability. My mother, my grandmother, my sister, my child, they have a disability too. And I'm so glad that somebody's talking about that. Disability is something that doesn't discriminate. Disability happens to everyone. And that is one thing that I think can pull us together as just people in this country, is that disability will happen to everyone at some point, and we can either create our nation to be universally accessible for everyone or not, and that's a choice. So, you know, I think it's all really important to talk all about that stuff because people find it relatable. People want to hear about that stuff, and people have children and older adults who are their parents, you know, of all ages that this all pertains to. And it's the biggest intersectional group that we have in politics. So we might as well talk about it the most, right? So
Yeah. Neal?
Yeah, I'll just add to both Madeline and the representative's point that I think that when we are talking about accessibility, when we are talking about disability, we know that, for instance, the ADA just celebrated its 33rd anniversary. The ADA was written 33 years ago. Some of us here have been on this planet longer than the ADA has been around. Some of us are a part of the ADA, are classified as the ADA generation. What that means is we were alive before the ADA was written into law. So what that means is, but what that also means, this is something that Madeline touched on, when we are thinking about definitions, and we're thinking about expanding on definitions, not just as it relates to the ADA, but also specifically as it relates to disability, right? Because as we're thinking about, we are in the 3rd year of COVID. Long COVID is a reality. It's not just a reality, it is something that we need to, you know, politicians like to say, oh, well, we need to face it head on. Well, no, it is a reality that means that the definition of disability is automatically going to have to be expanded, period. Because there are going to be folks with long COVID and varying things that are impacted by long COVID that are going to, whether or not they want to identify as disabled, they are going to be a part of our community. And one of the things we have to do as the disabled community is not only think about expanding definitions, but also specifically think about how we in the disability community, unfortunately, have internalized ableism that we as individuals in the disability community don't often address. And it's something, unfortunately, I do have to disagree with Madeline to a little bit. It's something, unfortunately, that therapy is not going to, that's something that work that we're going to have to do as disability, as disabled folks, that a therapist can talk to you about, but that's something internally that you have to work on, frankly. So when we are thinking about expanding definitions, when we are thinking about accessibility, when we know that we are living in a world that isn't accessible, right? We have to understand that when we are thinking about our reasonable accommodations, whether it be for this conversation that we're having tonight, or whether it be when we wake up in the morning, as disabled people, we know that we have to think about reasonable accommodations every second of the day. That's magnified when you're running for office. And then magnified again when you're in elected office. So there are layers to everything, and it's important as we peel those layers back that when we are thinking about expanding definitions, when we're thinking about internalized ableism, understand that organizations like Run for Something, organizations like Disability Victory, and other like-minded individuals like the folks on this panel can help you with our vast resources, right? But also understand that we are not the only experts out there. Understand that you have to be able to, and I'm going to go back to something I already said earlier, do your own research.
Thank you for that. So we are at 8:54. I think that we have time for another question. One that I think would be a really good one to answer. As a queer disabled man in Mississippi, it saddens me that anti-trans activists have gotten so much through in terms of legislation. What could I run for to better reform, revamp, or create better financial and material situations for my fellow disabled and queer folks in this poor, historically troubled state?
I can try to take a stab at that. First of all, go check out Run for What. But I mean, because there are things that you can do at every level of government, whether it is finding a local area that and making sure that these types of policies stay out of local schools. So if you ran for a school board, you can try to make sure that that the school boards stay LGBTQ friendly. And if that doesn't work, if that's not your thing, my thing was, at least at the state or federal level, that I have interest, and I go with where my interest is. So I found that the State House was where it was, and being able to be involved in some getting shot down of getting some really horrendous anti-LGBTQ legislation shot down this year was awesome. So we had a good win there, but it was hard fought. So
yeah, and I will echo that in terms of talking about how local office and really every office can impact, it can have an impact. So we often talk about in the disability community, every issue is a disability issue. Every issue, every policy issue touches the lives of disabled people, but that's really the case for everyone, where no matter what the identity is, people who are marginalized, who experience oppression, are more impacted by economic changes, by poverty, by discrimination, whether that's people of color, racially marginalized people, LGBTQ. So think about local office. Running for school board is a good one. One example in the piece that we shared about running for local office is in the town where our mailing office is located. The city council has made our accessible public transit is accessible. Our bus system has made it completely free for everyone. So ridership has gone up for the first time. It is the highest it's been in 39 years, because people no longer have to pay for the bus. We now have a program for universal basic income for low-income families as well. So, those are things that can happen. There are so many programs at the local level. Someone put in the chat, the library board, when we're talking about the attempts to take diverse books out of libraries, joining the library board. You can do things beyond running for office, working on a campaign, participating in a mutual aid network. So there's a lot of things that you can do on the local level, because when we're trying to build for systemic change, we have to start local. All politics is local, and we can start by building our solidarity and building our communities up. So with that, thank you to all of our panelists tonight for sharing their insight. We are here to help you claim your own seat in public office, and we're going to keep fighting to see more disabled, chronically ill, and neurodivergent candidates in every county, city, and school board. You can be one of them. If you're still in more need of guidance, we hope you'll join Run for Something for a candidate intro call, where they'll cover their endorsement process and tips to start their campaign. The registration link is in the chat. And for Disability Victory, visit our website at disabilityvictory.org. We are in the process of pulling together some programming for the fall. We will be sharing all of our resources and programming through our email list. I promise we do not spam you with emails. So make sure you look out for them. Also follow us and Run for Something on social media. Before we go, I want to thank the Run for Something team, our amazing former candidates, my colleague Neal, who has put up with my text messages for 11.5 hours today, our wonderful ASL interpreter, who at the last moment had to do this all by herself, for being with us tonight. If you have any feedback for Run for Something's team or for Disability Victory, please share it with us. They're going to put a feedback form link in the chat, and they'll make sure to pass on anything for us, for Disability Victory, that is. Lastly, everyone on this call will be getting a follow-up email with resources from Run for Something to get you started and motivated. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and have a great night.